David had a long day. Staying late at work on Christmas Eve was the last thing he wanted, but he couldn't say no to his boss's insistence. Snow had started to fall, blanketing the city, and the street lights cast a faint glow on the shimmering white ground. As David walked home, the streets grew colder and quieter. By the time the clock struck midnight, David finally reached his apartment in an old stone building. As soon as he opened the door, he felt something strange. The air inside was unusually cold. The twinkling Christmas tree lights flickered, sometimes dimming entirely. "Must be an electrical issue," he muttered to himself. David took off his coat and walked into the living room. He turned on the TV to bring some Christmas cheer and headed to the kitchen to prepare a warm drink. But as he entered, he heard a faint tapping noise. At first, it sounded like the usual creaks of an old house, but the tapping became more rhythmic, like someone deliberately moving plates. Trying to suppress his unease, David cautiously entered the kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place. The cabinets were shut, and the plates were neatly stacked. But as he turned to leave, he heard a whisper behind him. "Welcome home, David." Startled, David whipped around, but there was no one there. Panicking, he tried turning the lights on. The bulb flickered a few times and then went out completely. The only light in the house came from the faintly glowing Christmas tree in the living room. As David returned to the living room, he thought he saw something move near the base of the tree. A shadow shifted almost imperceptibly. "I'm imagining things," he told himself. But then the whispers started again, clearer this time. "Why did you come back?" Heart pounding, David moved toward the sound. Standing before the large mirror in the living room, he noticed something chilling. In the reflection, a blurry figure stood behind him. Quickly, he turned around, but the room was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, the figure was even clearer now. It had jet-black eyes and a sinister grin, staring directly at him. David scrambled to find his phone, but it was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, he heard what sounded like a child crying from one of the back rooms. The sound grew louder, echoing unerringly throughout the house. Summoning every ounce of courage, David approached the room and opened the door. The room was pitch black. As he stepped inside, the door slammed shut behind him with a loud thud, followed by the sound of a lock turning. Alone in the darkness, David felt a cold breath grazing the back of his neck. Then a piercing scream erupted, this time right beside him. He pounded on the door, desperate to escape, but it was no use. Somehow morning arrived. Sunlight poured into the room, and the door opened on its own. Exhausted and shaken, David stepped out. The house appeared normal again. But as he entered the living room, he saw a gift box sitting beneath the Christmas tree. It hadn't been there the night before. There was a note attached to the box. "Remember, the spirit of Christmas isn't always filled with joy." David couldn't bring himself to open the gift. That morning, he'd packed all his belongings and left the house for good. Yet every Christmas Eve, those who pass by the house claim they see the same gift box under the tree, but no one dares to open it. A cold winter wind swept through the empty streets of Willow Creek, an isolated town nestled between shadowy mountains. The town was a quiet place, forgotten by time, where only a handful of people remained. At the heart of the town stood an old, creaky hotel called the Crescent Lodge, known for its eerie silence and the secrets its walls seemed to hold. One snowy evening, Evelyn, a traveling journalist, arrived at the Crescent Lodge. She was covering a story on abandoned towns and their mysteries, and Willow Creek seemed like the perfect place to explore. The hotel's owner, a gruff, middle-aged man named Walter, greeted her with a forced smile and handed her a rusted key. "You're the only guest tonight," he said. "Most people don't stay here long." Evelyn brushed off his odd comment, thinking it was just small-town superstition. Her room was on the second floor, at the end of a dimly lit hallway. The air inside the hotel was stale, and the creak of her footsteps seemed to echo endlessly. After settling in, Evelyn went downstairs for dinner. The dining room was eerily quiet, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock. As she ate, she noticed a man sitting alone at a table in the corner. He was dressed in an old-fashioned suit, his face pale and expressionless. Curious, Evelyn approached Walter at the counter. "Who's the man in the corner?" she asked. Walter's face turned pale. "There's no one else here," he whispered. Evelyn turned back, but the man was gone. Her stomach tightened. Was her mind playing tricks on her? That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, and the old wooden floors groaned as if someone was walking down the hall. At exactly midnight, there was a knock at her door. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. No one answered. Summoning her courage, she opened the door. The hallway was empty, but as she stepped out, she saw a faint light coming from room 203, the room directly across from hers. Evelyn knew Walter had said there were no other guests. Slowly, she approached the door. It was slightly ajar. Pushing it open, she found an empty room. The furniture was covered in white sheets, and the air was freezing cold. On the bed lay a single object, a photograph of a family. The father in the photo was the same man she had seen in the dining room. Evelyn brought the photo to Walter, demanding answers. His hands trembled as he stared at it. "That's Daniel Brooks," Walter said. "He and his family stayed here decades ago. They were killed in that room. That's why no one stays in room 203 anymore." "Who killed them?" Evelyn asked. Walter hesitated. The killer was never caught. But people say their spirits never left. Determined to uncover the truth, Evelyn returned to room 203. She searched the room, feeling an oppressive weight in the air. As she checked under the bed, her flashlight flickered, and she heard faint whispers. "Help us. He's still here." Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her. The whispers grew louder, turning into agonized screams. Evelyn banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. The room grew colder, and she felt a presence behind her. In a desperate attempt to escape, Evelyn smashed the window with a chair and climbed out onto the snowy ledge. She made her way back to the lobby, her heart racing. Walter stood behind the counter, watching her with a peculiar expression. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked. "They were murdered," Evelyn gasped. "But by who?" Walter's lips curled into a sinister smile. "By me," he said. "And now you know too much." Before Evelyn could react, Walter lunged at her. She grabbed a lamp from the counter and smashed it over his head, knocking him unconscious. She called the authorities and fled the hotel, leaving the cursed building and its secrets behind. The police arrested Walter, uncovering decades of crimes hidden within the Crescent Lodge. He had murdered countless guests over the years, hiding their bodies in the hotel's basement. But Evelyn never forgot the chilling whispers in room 203. She often wondered if the spirits of Daniel Brooks and his family finally found peace, or if they were still trapped, waiting for someone else to uncover their story. Mehmet was an experienced truck driver who had been on the road for years. He was used to dark, desolate highways and was not easily scared. That night he set out on a long haul from Erzurum to Mardin, carrying a heavy load. It was past midnight, and the road was eerily empty, with only the occasional passing car. As he drove through the winding mountain roads, his radio began to crackle with static. Mehmet reached over to change the station, but every frequency was filled with the same interference. Frustrated, he turned it off and focused on the road ahead. The highway became even more deserted. To his left was a sheer cliff, and to his right, a dense forest loomed. Suddenly, something caught his eye in the rearview mirror, a shadow darting through the darkness, illuminated by his truck's headlights. "Am I imagining things?" Mehmet muttered to himself. But the shadow briefly crossed in front of his headlights and vanished again. A short while later, Mehmet saw someone standing by the roadside, waving for a ride. It was a cold, dark night, and the figure appeared to be a woman wearing a bright red coat. She looked out of place, standing there alone in such freezing weather. Mehmet slowed down and rolled down his window. "Where are you headed?" he asked. The woman tilted her head slightly and replied in a cold, monotone voice, "To the village ahead." Mehmet hesitated for a moment, but decided to let her in. "Hop in," he said, opening the door. The woman silently climbed into the truck. The woman remained completely silent inside the truck. Mehmet tried to make small talk, asking her a few questions, but she didn't respond. She sat still, her hands clasped in her lap, staring straight ahead. After a while, Mehmet started feeling uneasy about the silence. The woman hadn't moved an inch since getting in. Meanwhile, the road itself seemed to grow stranger. Though Mehmet had driven this route countless times, it felt unfamiliar. Sharp turns, unfamiliar trees, and strange signs appeared along the way. "Something's not right," Mehmet muttered. Just then, the woman spoke in a low, distant voice. "We're getting close to where you need to drop me off." Mehmet jumped slightly. The woman hadn't looked at him, but raised her hand and pointed toward a narrow, unlit road ahead. Mehmet turned onto the narrow road, which led into an even darker part of the forest. The trees on either side seemed to press in, and his truck's headlights barely illuminated the path. Soon, an old wooden bridge appeared in the middle of the road. The woman said, "Stop here," and climbed out of the truck without waiting for Mehmet to respond. "Hey, where are you going?" Mehmet called after her, but the words stuck in his throat. She walked toward the bridge, her red coat glowing faintly in the headlights. Mehmet noticed something chilling her feet weren't touching the ground. When the woman reached the center of the bridge, she stopped. Mehmet watched her silhouette from the truck, his heart pounding. Slowly she turned to face him, and he saw her eyes empty, dark voids staring back at him. Then she spoke, her voice echoing unnaturally, "You should never have come here." A piercing scream filled the air as the woman vanished into thin air. A chilling wind swept through the truck, carrying with it faint whispers and cries. Panicked, Mehmet threw the truck into reverse, backing out of the narrow path as fast as he could. He didn't stop until he reached the main highway. At dawn, Mehmet stopped at a small gas station and told the attendant about his night. The man's face turned pale as he listened. "You took that road?" The attendant asked, his voice trembling. That bridge collapsed years ago. It leads to nowhere. There's a story about a woman in a red coat who died there. People say her spirit haunts the road, appearing to drivers who pass through at night. Shaken by the revelation, Mehmet vowed never to take that route again. But every night he drove, he couldn't shake the fear that he might see the woman in the red coat again, staring at him through his rearview mirror.